Welcome everyone to this episode of A Story Always, in which we have the great pleasure of having with us David Kizzia. I did my best guess.
You did great.
Great. David, or do you prefer Dave?
It really doesn't matter. Most of the time, I just kind of know that when people go, when they read my name and they look down and they go, David. Yep, that's me. It's that gesture means, okay, they're about to say my last name, so it's fine. Doesn't matter.
Perfect. First of all, thanks a lot for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
For those of you who don't know him, he's one of the developers and publishers behind Monkeyfun Studios. He's the co-designer of Spirit of 77.
That's
back
correct.
There, and the designer of Bedlam Hall.
Yes.
And he's working on a new game called A Town Called Malice.
Yes.
Which is going to go on Kickstarter next year.
Yep, in early 2019. Wow, it's hard to believe that it's almost 2019.
Yeah, I know.
I know that's a funny thing to say, but that's not that far away. No.
So first of all, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to, first of all, I want to ask you to give us a quick pitch about the game. What is it about? And in the meantime, I'm going to go to the chat and share links around.
Sure. So just to explain more about A Town Called Malice requires a little bit of explanation of what we've done in the past. So Monkeyfun Studios, or game studio, has primarily done games based off of the Powered by the Apocalypse framework, Spirit of 77 Bedlam Hall. And this one we decided to do a little bit differently because the subject matter and the type of gameplay we wanted to encourage. So Town Called Malice is based off of a system called the Story Pillar system, originally put out by Protagonist Industries for their game Home by Dark, which is a 1980s kids exploring new things like E.T., Flight of the Navigator. Actually, Stranger Things fits into that quite nicely as well. And I really like the system itself for what it did in terms of wanting to have player and group dynamics to be more of the focus as opposed to straight up stat rolling. So having said that, and I know that's very, technical insider baseball, kind of stuff, but the game itself,
we love that stuff here, so don't worry.
Okay. So basically what we wanted to do is to have something that was based similar in nature to the Nordic Noir genre. And Nordic Noir is kind of a relationship-based thriller, dark type of story that comes out of the Scandinavian countries. The one that everybody has heard of course, is Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but there's plenty out there. There's Wallander, there's a great series called Trapped. One of the series that really inspired the genre, or what we wanted to do with A Town Called Malice, is an Amazon series called Fortitude. And Fortitude's really great because it takes place like in a Arctic town in a, I believe it was, I want to say, I can't remember which town it was, but anyway, it was Scandinavia, or country it was in. But basically they are dealing with a problem within the town, but there are so many relationships to cause complications for them to be able to truly confront the threat to the town. And as I was getting interested into that type of story, I also realized that was part of what the American TV series Twin Peaks is based off of, where there's a lot of relationships, both good and bad, that drive the overall narrative, but they're always trying to overcome a lurking shadow that's in the town that's causing problems. And in Twin Peaks, it's the evil spirit that basically is caused the death of Laura Palmer. So what I wanted to do was have something where instead of it being like a normal like dice rolling in terms of saying, okay, I have an investigation of this or that, because that's not really how those types of storylines go. It's more along the lines of them finding out things and trying to work together to be able to find out more information or keep the town together. But their past baggage and emotional problems, what have you, make that difficult to be able to truly overcome. So I really liked how that system worked and what Jason Olsen, the creator of Home by Dark, had done. And I knew that that was something that it was different than I had done before. It was a different type of skill set, a different type of way of looking at games or at a game narrative. But I'm really glad I did, and I have enjoyed every single time we've had an opportunity to play it, because each time it's a little more freeform than what I would normally do. But every time the story that comes out of it's always incredible.
Amazing. By the way, for the people on the chat, if you have any question for David at any point, feel free to send me a message on the chat. I'll try to bring them to David. So this genre of Nordic horror.
Noir, yes.
Noir.
That's all good.
What do you feel? What do you find alluring or interesting about it?
Sure. Well, I really liked seeing. Actually, there was another TV series that was on Netflix called Dark.
Yeah.
Where, oh, great, you've seen it. So, Dark, they're dealing with things that had been, that, as I said, threaten the town. But the real thrust of the episode by episode plot line is them overcoming the relationship stuff that had started back when the main characters were in high school. And I found that very interesting. And one of the things that I think is always lacking when you're talking about narratives based off of facing supernatural items or adversaries is that we don't pay enough attention to what really will stop us from being able to overcome. In Bedlam Hall, which I always describe as Downton Abbey meets the Addams Family, we make it very clear that the main characters in the grain, if you were to make this into a movie, in 9 times out of 10, they would never be the center of, the attention. They would not be the main characters. They would always be the background characters that you always see. And I always found it very entertaining of a thought, like when you're thinking of like Call of Cthulhu or what have you, is that most people who would be faced with something that terrible would have one of two, in reality, 2 reactions. One, where they would basically find it annoying because it was stopping them from getting to their job or being able to go pick up the kids or whatever. And 2, most people would just try to ignore it. I don't think most of the people, if we saw a whole bunch of zombies, it's like, the movie Shaun of the Dead, the first 20 minutes of that is so, it's funny because it takes him like the first 20 minutes to realize, oh, there's a zombie outbreak, because it really just doesn't sink in that there's something horrible going on. So, so that was part of the thrust of Bedlam Hall in terms of like the meta commentary I was trying to put into it. For Town Called Malice, I really like the idea of saying that, in a ulterior meta commentary level, which I always try not to be too heavy on that kind of thing, because I'm not really good at it. But I like to say that ultimately what causes problems in us overcoming things that threaten us, not just in terms of, like terrors or things like that, but what really causes problems is the fact that we have difficulty getting over our own problems with other people in a one-to-one. So I like the idea of being able to explore people working on their own stuff as well as trying to overcome a darkness that's threatening them, because you don't see that enough. And I really like that idea. And I had been watching a lot of series like Wallander, and there's another great series called Hinterland, and which takes place in Wales. And the Brits have really appreciated the whole like Scandinavian cold, weather kind of things, like the Killing. Uh, uh, oh God, what was the other one? The Bridge is another one that's really well known. I really like the idea of having those kinds of heavy types of narratives and environments, because it had been something I had really not done previously. I know that Spirit of 77 and to an extent Bedlam Hall are known for being a little bit, I want to say wacky, but they're also known to be very kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a little bit, over the top in certain ways. This is a different thing for me to try to explore different skill sets of mine, and also trying to, try creating a new type of environment for a game that I had never done before. And I really believe that that's something that I know what my wheelhouse is. This is out of my wheelhouse, so I'm trying to see how to do it better, because I do believe in always continually trying to challenge myself in terms of the games I'm trying to put out.
And how does the story pillar system help you do that?
Sure. So the way the way the game works is that there are 3 story pillars that make up the actual narrative. One is the darkness. That's the darkness that's threatening the town. There's an event which everybody needs to have successful for the health and promotion of the town. And then there's the body. Okay, and the body is what basically is the impetus, the spark that kicks everything off. So if you're thinking about it like Twin Peaks, that's a really good analogy or example of this. So obviously the body is Laura Palmer, and obviously the darkness is the Black Lodge, the Bob, the evil spirit. But the event is the sale of or the sale of the hotel, or basically trying to get the investors into it, which is important in order to keep the town's livelihood going. And I really liked that particular type of 3 major point narratives, because I realized there was a lot of ways you could play that. For instance, although it doesn't seem like it, I really like the movie Jaws about the shark and everything, because the body is what they find, the monster, the darkness is the shark, and the event is the holiday weekend that they're having. Because even though it's a beach town, it's a tourist town. So basically, they have their livelihood is based off of whether or not that weekend goes off well, and obviously there are problems that take place on it. So I liked having those kinds of things for everyone to focus on as the currency in terms of the narrative. And so that was what really kind of drove my interest in using the story pillar system, because I realized that was a lot more flexible than just saying we're going to have a narrative. And Jason Olson, who I'll reference quite a bit, by the way, and if you haven't seen it, Home by Dark by Protagonist Industries, I always recommend it. He really liked certain aspects of the story game Fiasco. And so he wanted to have a lot of that type of dice rolling to be able to work out relationships in certain narratives. So the way I translated that, and might I add, I reached out to Jason saying, Jason, I'm afraid I apologize in advance because I'm gonna dirty up your system with Monkeyfun stuff. And he said, go ahead, Dave, just don't hurt it too bad. And so everybody at the table plays a specific role within the town that I knew or had seen was a recurring archetype in these types of stories. So obviously there's the character that's called the Law, which could be the sheriff or the constable, whatever. And everybody at the table has a goal that they're trying to achieve. And one of the things I really liked was that there was a role for, as I said, the law, but there's also a role for the criminal, which is basically the crime, the focal point for the town. And I like the idea to say that you have these 2 types of roles, but they don't have to be at odds with one another. Because what often happens is that relationships can develop between these two types of characters that are actually good. In the fact, maybe they went to high school together, or maybe they have an understanding of saying, okay, this you can get away with, this you can't get away with, and the criminal stays within those boundaries. So, and in contrast, you have what's called the official, which is like the mayor or like the city manager, who can be at odds with the law based off of how they set up their relationship together. So, which you've seen in a million things. And I think allowing that kind of flexibility for the relationships that come to the table make it a better story overall, or story experience for everybody.
Mm-hmm. We got a question from the chat from Pixel Scandal asking if the darkness is something determined by the players in some kind of world building stage, or is there like play sets or scenarios like in Fiasco?
First of all, I'd like to say hello to Pixel Scandal. Good seeing you, bud. And actually, Pixel Scandal, they do also their own podcast, might I add, also on Twitch, which I recommend people checking out because they're good people. So there's two methods to do it. I mean, we have play sets that are specific scenarios for people to do. But when players are more comfortable with the setting, it definitely can be a a collaborative experience where people put together the ideas and of what they see. And that actually has happened for me as while doing playtesting, where if I have a group of players who buy into the system, buy into that type of responsibility for the player, they are much, and the comfort level, they are easier to drive it more so than the play set. And ultimately, story games are based off of how the players collaborate together, and that's more important than just what the play set says. So I always try to recommend go with how the players are building the town and building the threats and building the pillars, as opposed to whatever I tell them.
Mm-hmm. Do these play sets come with like several options? Is everything fixed? How do they work?
So so one of the play sets that I'm going to be including in the book, or it will either be in the book or will be available, is a setting called Malice Station, where basically it's taking place in a mining colony outside of one of the moons of Jupiter. And I really liked it because it was very similar to the idea of saying, well, Alien technically fits into this kind of thing where they have a darkness, they're trying to get through their tour so they can finish up and so they can get the yearly bonuses. So in the playset, I make references to potential locations within the town. I'll explain that in a minute. But also, making a reference to who the body is and elements of what the darkness and the event are. But there are also open questions for the table to elaborate on and to guide them to being able to fill in the blanks. Everybody within the town as a role adds a location to the town, and that's very similar to what we came up with for Bedlam Hall. And that in Bedlam Hall, everybody builds the house, right? You say, where's the rooms and what have you. And if you've played Bedlam Hall, you realize that the house layout can get very weird because people will say, yeah, why don't we put the kitchen on top of the garage? It's like, okay, that's your game. So what happens is that different roles provide different locations to the town, because the town is intended to be small and isolated. So it's saying, okay, as an example, if somebody's playing the medic will bring some sort of hospital or infirmary to the town as their main location, so players can go to it. And also another element of it is that players get, when dealing with their relationships, get what's called character points, which allows them to be able to improve the relationships that they have, but also add more locations or more things to the table, so that way they can drive the narrative in a particular direction.
And you mentioned that the relationships among characters are very important for the play for the game. How can you tell us a little bit more in detail about them and how do they develop through play?
Absolutely. So what happens during gameplay is that that there is what's called, and I'm calling them height and cult, and that's basically I believe it was Icelandic that say good relationship, bad relationship, and at the table, if we have 4 players, there are 4 good dice and 4 bad dice, or height and cult, and everybody basically goes around and picks 1 die or 1 point. I like using actually Othello chips. That's really cool too. But basically what you're doing is that you're determining the relationship with the people around you on your left and your right, not unlike Fiasco. And if you have a bad relationship, you then explain why. And if Angel, we were playing, and then like you were playing the criminal and I was playing the law, going back to that example, and we both have good relationship with one another, we can say, oh yeah, we were altar boys together. So even though we grew up differently, we still have that relationship. Or it could be a situation where if you have like a black or cult and I have a white chip or something like that, I think we have a better relationship than what you think we have. So I may say, yeah, we were in high school together, but you could say, yeah, but I still harbor resentment towards you because I took your girlfriend to the prom or something like that. And of course, if we have 2 black chips, or 2 black dice or cult dice between one another, that means we have a terrible relationship with one another. And that's important because during gameplay, when you actually say, okay, I'm going to spend my turn working on my relationship with you, Angel, say, I want to, resolve the issue that you have with me about us being in high school together. I get character points or points to be able to apply to other things because I tried to fix our relationship. But in the long term, we need to, we need to, at the very end, the final confrontation, we need to confront the darkness, but we also need to support and hold the event, which is basically intended to keep the town going. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that the bad relationships amongst the players, the cult dice or chips, basically that is what we're rolling against, because you can't really succeed with an event to bring town together if there's still bad blood amongst everyone. So there's 2 elements to that, and I really like how that has developed in some interesting character scenarios. I played one game where the woman on my left, it was at the local game convention here in Los Angeles. The group had sat down. They had never played a Fiasco or a story game or anything really outside of Dungeons and Dragons. So they were very keen to see the game because they liked the genre. And the woman on my left, she and I had, she did not know what was going on at first, but she was game, and we had chosen to have a mixed relationship, 1 bad, 1 good. And so during gameplay, we decided, between the 2 of us, oh yeah, she's my ex-wife, and it developed into where us trying to not try to get back together, but us trying to resolve the unspoken issues of our divorce became how the 2 of us related in the game. And all of them were just like going, wow, this is really some serious gameplay that we have going on. And that's exactly what story games can provide to people, in that it's not just we're going to go out and kill the Demogorgon or something like that. It's where you focus on building the scenario, building the relationships, building who you are, and trying to resolve the bad blood that may exist, but also try to address issues within you. Another playtest that I did had been where a group of people had come to a town, and there had been a killed a teenager, and this was totally during play. None of this had been planned out, but it happened that one of the characters who was playing, or players who was playing the role of the stranger, was coming to town because he had a relationship or family relationship with the person who had died, and during gameplay, it had been it had been developed that my character had accidentally killed that, the family member of him, and when we were working it out, at one point his character was basically going to shoot mine in revenge, and it really was kind of a surprise because nobody expects a gun to be pulled on by one of your players, but it was also a really intense character development moment, and ultimately the two of us, as the characters, worked it out and found a way to be able to resolve that issue that had come up. And as I said, Spirit of 77 and Bedlam Hall, they are really high in either action or antics. This is the first time I've really tried to develop something that has that as its main focus, or one of its main focuses, in trying to develop the story, develop the relationships, develop characters, but also the conflict coming from just being people. And I really like that about the system, and I really like that about the game, and I'm looking forward to being able to put this out, because every time I play it, it's been a very interesting game.
Great. An important part of play is trying to resolve that bad blood. Can it get worse? Can the relationship be ruined?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So what happens is that we're talking, going back to the example, we're talking it out about the problems that our characters have, and then finally come to a point where, okay, we need to have the dice resolve this. So we roll the dice, and there's dice pools that require us to, go against a difficulty rating. And if it's a situation where we fail, our relationship can get worse, and that causes ultimately a effect and a consequence to the overall gameplay.
Interesting. And how does the darkness manifest in the game? How does that presence permeate everything?
So what happens is, and I'm not wanting to get too into the weeds about the mechanics, but what happens is that as the people try to find out more about the body pillar, basically trying to figure out what killed her or him or her, what caused this, finding out more, the dice that are part of the pool that's on the body can get put to either the event or put to the darkness. And the darkness, basically, as people fail, gets more powerful in that, through game progression. So what happens is when the dice pool for the darkness gets more or gets more powerful, those become what's called manifestations, where people start seeing strange things in the town, or people start seeing terrible things happen to some of the other civilians there, and it shows that the darkness is growing in intensity and power. Another influence was a series, or both a comic book series and a movie called 30 Days of Night, where that isolated Alaskan town is being set upon by a bunch of vampires. And so as the vampires grow more powerful, and actually also like Salem's Lot, if you want to look at it like that, by Stephen King, as the vampire grows more powerful, people are starting to see the effects of it, where other people are just sleeping more and more, or animals are being found dead. And so as the darkness becomes more prevalent, the darkness starts to become more and more visible, both through itself and through its actions.
And how does the character of the town itself manifest in play? Because it's such a big part.
Sure. It manifests in a couple of ways. So, as I said, everybody adds a location. So, I'm a big fan of index cards. I go through a lot of them, and so those are in front of the table, but also the definitions of those locations. For instance, as you you playing the medic again, going to that, then you get to decide what the infirmary looks like. Is it a hospital? Is it just a medical first aid station? You decide that. But also what happens is that for every location, you get to create an NPC civilian that's located as part of that location. So what happens is that as people become more familiar with the town, and everybody lays out those cards there, and we all talk about it before gameplay starts, people start adding details to the overall town's makeup, and it ultimately gives the town its own flavor and identity. One game that we were running, it became clear that, and this came up totally from gameplay, this was not something that had been written out, was that that there was a mill, that was a sawmill that was part of the town, and one of the other players decided that there was going to be a campaign to try to save the local forests that had been previously protected by the town regulations because they didn't want it to be damaged. So it became a theme of gameplay to say that people were being very they were split in terms of how they felt about that initiative to use those trees as part of the lumber for the town, because you could see both sides of it. I mean, one, they want to protect the town in terms of like it's forest, but they also wanted to protect the town in terms of its economic growth because they knew that there was problems taking place. So it's really interesting to see, even when you take out the elements of the darkness or anything supernatural, how people address the aspects of the town and build it into something where it has its own breath and life to it.
Amazing. What do you think this setting, the small town with hidden secrets underneath, is so interesting? What do you think it sparks so many stories?
Couple things. One of the things that I really like about small town settings is the fact that not just the secrets of it, but probably the fact that most of the secrets are kind of known already. When you live in a small town, I'm not sure if anybody else is in it, but I find that when you live in a small town, you find out everybody kind of knows everybody's business, whether you want to or not. It happens. And so how people react to that knowledge, like some people will know so-and-so is kind of fooling around with their spouse, but they may not be involved in it, or they may say, hey, good luck to them, or their spouse is a crummy person and he deserves it, or whatever. So because you have that small town, limited resources kind of environment, it allows the game to be more self-contained, and it requires the players to resolve their own issues as opposed to saying, we're just going to call the state police. In fact, that's something very specific, is that the town itself is isolated from most places. So even though the body is found, the players themselves have to address it because they can't just send it to the next town and let it be dealt with. FBI or Scotland Yard do not come to the smaller townships because there's no point. You're too far away. You deal with it, and that's something that actually happens quite a bit in the Nordic Noir, is the fact that they acknowledge that these places are removed from the normal major civilizations, and that's just a facet of those kinds of environments. And I live in Los Angeles, and I know you live in London, but I have had an opportunity to live in small towns, actually up in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a self-reliance about people who've lived there quite a while, because they realize, a hard winter, they're not going to see people. If the power goes out, you need to have that type of backup resources, or you need to make sure your larder is filled up with your your safety, food, or your provisions, because a cold winter could be happening like 4 months at a time or more, and that you may be isolated from anybody being able to help you for a good couple of months before anyone could even walk to it. So I really kind of like that as a, um, a storyteller and a game designer, to be able to say it is a locked room of sorts. Living there is really rough, but I do believe that is something that is interesting and has a lot of story potential.
And that's kind of the dark side of it. What do you think is the humane, warm part of living in this kind of place, and what do you think of spirit, and what is on part of the experience you get out of the game?
Sure. The good side to being in small town or settings like that is that you do have a better chance of community. Talking about, again, relationships, going to the extreme of saying, yeah, the criminal and the law can definitely have, a fine relationship as long as the boundaries are set. So community becomes important. Another good example is the American TV series Deadwood.
Mm.
One of the major characters in it is the owner of the local saloon, and his actions, even though he doesn't like people and he's out to always get the advantage, is the fact he knows that civilization is coming to their remote, isolated area. So he knows they have to basically, get along in certain ways. So if it was a large town, it's very easy to kind of outrun, like a city like New York City. If you live there, if you don't like the environment you're in or you have problems, it's very easy to say, okay, I'm just going to move up a couple blocks and I'll probably never see anybody again. And that's not the way in small towns. It's the fact, if you've got an issue with somebody, you deal with the issue, or you basically learn to live with the issue, because nobody's going anywhere for quite some time. So I like that as a storyteller, the fact that it makes people work together. I like the idea of people being able to find the relationships with one another, and to address these kinds of things. It's nice. In terms of like the narrative and in actual story development, it's cool, but it is challenging because, you have to face certain things,
Yeah. And we have all these different like elements of setting of a story that come from many series and movies. How was the process for you of analyzing all of this media and extracting what you found,
Sure.
what was interesting for you for the game?
Well, that kind of goes to kind of my own process anyway. And what I mean by that is the bigger question that, is not necessarily why did you pick it about Nordic Noir.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that, Dave, you did a game about the 70s? Yeah, I did. And you did a game about Downton Abbey? Yeah, I kind of did. And so the point is, I usually find that I pursue games based off of a particular type of story type, or a genre that I'm personally getting into. One of the things I learned this advice from another game designer who had said, don't worry about your mechanics when you're starting out, because people don't always remember, they don't remember mechanics. They don't remember, the dice pools or something like that. What they remember are the stories they develop together, and the dice allow that to happen. So what I find is that, I am the first person to say I'm not the best at creating game mechanics or clever game mechanics per se. But what I do is interesting stories. And I like to say that the stories drive me to saying, okay, well, how would you do this? How would you make a game like based off of something like Twin Peaks or Fortitude or something like that? How would you do that? Same thing, like, okay, how do you make an interesting game about being, a servant in the Edwardian times? How do you make that play out where it's, entertaining to everybody, but also a challenge every day? So what I find is that usually if I find that I'm going back to particular types of interesting ideas or genres, I do a lot of research on it. Going back to Bedlam Hall for a second. So Bedlam Hall actually came out from my wife. She had been a fan of Downton Abbey and watched all the seasons. I had watched the first two, but kind of stepped away from it. But when she was watching the last one, she was watching it consistently, and I got hooked and was watching it with her. And the question she turned to me and said, why don't you make a game like this? And we were out grocery shopping. We went to the local market, and while we were going down the aisles, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be funny if you were playing the butler or a normal butler to the Addams Family, basically, crazy people? And I laughed just right there in the frozen food aisle. And what often happens is that I will come up with a idea that really kind of sparks my curiosity, which drives me to see, well, how would you do that? What would make it happen? One other thing that came up was for one of our pamphlet games on our. Oh, I should do my pitch, shouldn't I? Always go find us on monkeyfunstudios.com, and we're on Drive-Thru RPG and all that. Okay, so that's my pitch. So what happens is that I will want to come up with different ideas, and I really liked what had been done with one-page RPGs, like what John Harper had done with Laser and Feelings. Grant Howlett does a lot of great ones out there, and I kept trying to figure out how could I do that? What would I do? And so that's where the pamphlet RPG came out of, where it's 2 pages. I know I'm cheating because I'm using 2 pages instead of 1. But trying to get a game into that parameter, it was an interesting type of, okay, well, how would you do that kind of exercise for me? And even though I said, I don't follow, I'm not good at game mechanics per se, or come up with interesting ones. One idea that always kind of cracked me up was the idea of making the music background as a specific game mechanic. Because in Spirit of 77, all of our adventures reference playlists. We reference music a lot because we wanted to have the 70s be represented not just from the TV and the movies, but we wanted the music to be there very strongly and prevalently. So I had always wanted to say, well, how would you do something like that? And so can I use a 4-letter word, Angel? I don't know if I can. Can I?
What? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So we came up with a game called Gothis Fuck.
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. I wanted to ask. So Gothis Fuck was an entertaining little game where it was everybody being out at a nightclub, being, a lot of social stuff. But I really like the idea of saying, okay, the turns are going to be based off of the music that's supposedly playing at the club itself. So, and it came with its own list of songs that would be playing, in the background. And also, you may say, okay, I love this song. So you get a benefit when this song is playing, or you may say, I hate this song. And so you get a benefit when that song is playing. But you can't determine when that song will come up while it's playing out. So I kind of like that as an interesting little exercise to see, to test how would I make that happen? How would I make that a enjoyable experience? And that's one of the things. Now talk a little bit about the industry right now. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I say a lot is that it's a great time to be a designer because you don't need to be afraid of, the math anymore. You don't need to be afraid of the systems per se or creating a full system, because there's a lot of good frameworks out there right now. Obviously Fate, obviously PbtA, Blades in the Dark is now, people are now basing stuff off of that. and this actually started off well with 10 years ago with D20, but you have the opportunity that if you have an interesting idea you want to try to play, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good foundation and building blocks that you can use to basically make your idea playable and then see if it's got legs and see where it goes. I believe it was Vincent Baker, I think. If it's not Vincent Baker, it was somebody else, please, I apologize. But Vincent Baker, one of the co-creators of Apocalypse World, says as part of his advice to people to not worry about having a complete game for your playtest. Just put stuff together and then give it a try. See what happens. Because who are you really hurting, And then when you find that there are certain areas that, are a little bit clunky, work through them right there at the table and see what happens, because often you'll come up with interesting ideas right there that you may not have been able to if you were sitting, completely removed from everything. A great example of that is, so one of the aspects of Bedlam Hall is that, everybody has its own secret, and then a lot of the secrets people are trying to find out about one another. And during a playtest I was doing, one of the players had said, "Oh, I think this character, she said, the secret is for the chauffeur that he and I used to have an affair." And I looked at him and I said, and I knew it wasn't his secret. And I said, "So, is that true?" And I was expecting him to say no. And he looked at her and said, "Sure." And it had never even occurred to me that maybe you would want, as a player, to take on another secret or something like that. And it changed the mechanics of the game. In my last playtest for Malice, what happened is that a group of people were saying, "Oh, okay, well, we know what the darkness is. This darkness has been something that has plagued our town for a while. Luckily, in the town archives, we have this object." It was like a special, amulet or something like that, that will ward it off. And I sat there thinking about this, going, wow, I didn't really think about how objects were going to come up. And so the mechanic got worked out right there, and it worked great. And the point of this is to say, never be afraid to take something that you don't feel is 100% complete to the table, as long as you set the expectations that, okay, we're going to work this through. There may be certain things that may be a little clunky, but let's play it and see what happens. Because then you have a lot of people who are interested in making the game go forward. I'm really lucky in that, because of the local game convention out here in Los Angeles actually takes place 3 times a year. It's not just once. So you have a lot of recurring players. So I have a really good group of people who, when I take a game to a game convention, I know will be interested in playing it, because I know that they're familiar with my type of game, but I also know what kind of players they are. I know, but it will be a lot of different types of players as opposed to just my normal gaming group. And I know I'm going to get a lot of information out of that.
So one question I usually ask is about some issues you found during play and how did you solve it, that kind of stuff. But you already did that, which I love. So for a change, could you tell us something we've talking before, kind of more on the publishing side, some issues you found, some lessons you learned about the publishing a game that you could tell us about?
Sure. Okay. So there's one of the things that I always say, not everybody does it, and that's fine. But I always tell people to, even though you may want to have, bring your game, if it's incomplete, to the table, it should be as complete as humanly possible before you get to Kickstarter. Because I believe that too many times people will not have a complete idea and then start, trying, doing the fundraising for it or the crowdfunding. And then they realize that it's more complicated than they initially expected. And then, you basically are letting people or disappointing people's expectations, because you're saying, okay, this is going to come out, and it doesn't. So I always say, try to have your game as complete as possible. One thing I always recommend people do when they're doing Kickstarters, or publishing is the community out there for game designers or publishers are very open. I was very fortunate when we were originally doing Spirit of 77. I was fortunate to know a lot of people in the industry already, so I asked a lot of questions and asked a lot of questions to people I didn't know. And I have found that a lot of people, the bigger names, are far more approachable than most people give them credit for. Fred Hicks of Evil Hat is, well known for responding to every email he gets. And he's very approachable and will tell you anything you ask him. And he will say, what works for him or what hasn't worked. And, I found both Vincent and Maggie Baker very approachable. And I find that it's better to lean on the community to basically help you solve a lot of the rookie mistakes that all of us have made, because, and have found our own solutions, as opposed to just trying to do it yourself. I was a good example of me trying to pay it forward. My buddy Christopher Gray, who did Happiest Apocalypse on Earth.
Yeah, we had him here some time ago, and I think he told us about how you help him.
Yeah, I mean, because he had come to one of our playtests for one of our games at a convention. He said, I was really interested in making my own. And so I tried to provide as much feedback as I could, also not trying to say, well, you should do it like this or do it like that. That's not cool. But say, okay, well, these are the mistakes we made. These are the things we learned, lessons learned, the hard lessons, and wanting to always help him get further. And we do that with a lot of folks. So I always recommend not trying to do it by yourself. Speak with others and give yourself a break in terms of not trying to have all the answers at once. Because that really is what screws you up. Also, if you ever, for anybody listening or watching who is planning to do a Kickstarter or crowdfunding, I always recommend them finding the great book that Jamie Stegmaier had done from Stegmaier Games about his best practices. It helped us a lot. And I always recommend people buy a copy of it, because it will really show you the pros and cons of doing crowdfunding, and also why or how to make sure that it's successful as opposed to a painful experience. Mm-hmm. So, those are the things I always recommend. Do a little homework, check in with others, and try to have as complete of a idea or product before you actually start doing your crowdfunding.
That sounds really, really helpful, I think. So for your own Kickstarter for this new game, what plans do you have? What is more, when it's going to go live, more or less? What is the timeline? What kind of things do you think you'll be able to offer through the Kickstarter?
Sure. So we're expecting to be early 2019, right around March. Originally, we were talking about February, but we thought that was a little too ambitious because we wanted to make sure we put out the best thing possible. We're talking with a lot of different, or with some different folks about trying to enhance the experience of the game. One thing that we did with Bedlam Hall, as a previous example, is that we managed to have a group of people, and who just, if they decided to take that particular pledge level, we had a group that went to a place called the Magic Castle here in Los Angeles, which is actually the Magician's Club and restaurant, and everybody there was able to participate in what they called the Houdini seance, where everybody was there, and it's an amazing experience. And we did that because we wanted to have some of our upper tier folks have the opportunity to be immersed in that kind of creepy, supernatural Edwardian environment. Mm-hmm. So what we're planning for Malice, I will not, we won't be going back to Magic Castle for that, but we are considering different things that we want to try to do. I'm afraid to say anything because my wife is just off of camera looking at me saying, David, don't you promise anything we can't do. But we do have some ideas coming up. So it will be a very interesting Kickstarter campaign, and we promise that there will be some nice little benefits available as well. Yeah, that was something that was kind of our embarrassment of riches when we did Spirit of 77, which is we didn't expect people to be we made the game because we liked the 70s. We liked $6 Million Man. We liked Smokey and the Bandit. So we made the game for us, which is really what I always, another thing to recommend to people. But we didn't think anybody else would like it. So we had a few additional stretch goals, and we weren't expecting people to get into it. And then we were lucky enough to fund our first day. And then we managed to just kind of have a whirlwind for the first week and a half of people just really backing us very fast. And we didn't expect it. So we realized we had to offer things to folks because Kickstarter and crowdfunding is its own process to itself. It's a game to itself, and the fact you really need to be able to find a way to hit the sweet spots of your campaign timeline, and you also need to make sure that you are providing people bang for the buck and continually working to make sure people are having an enjoyable experience. When we were doing Bedlam Hall was really catapulted into what it needed to be when we realized the voice it should have been written in. And it was written very Lemony Snicket, series of unfortunate events style. So we knew that if the book itself was written with that kind of flavor, we wanted to make sure that the campaign had that type of flavor. So our campaign, we wrote every response to anybody in our updates in a very dismal and depressing way or tone, where we were always trying to tell people, you really shouldn't be backing this game. This game is depressing. And that actually helped build the community around Bedlam Hall, because people knew that it wasn't just a game that was being thrown at them. It was something where they were wanting to buy into the experience. It was interesting because Bedlam Hall was a lot different of an audience than Spirit of 77. And Spirit, did very, very well in terms of a lot of people want to pick it up. But, in its initial inception. But what happened with Bedlam Hall, which was very satisfying, is people were playing the game a lot sooner than we had expected. When it was available as a digital, we already had people like running in, and because we hadn't done a beta draft or a beta download as part of it. But people were really active in wanting to play it, and the people who like Bedlam Hall really like Bedlam Hall and play it frequently and enjoy the tone and all of it. And that's very satisfying to know that, we have two different types of audience. And there were people who had bought Bedlam Hall who had never played Spirit of 77 before. They didn't even know about it. And that's great, because that means that it's not just about, playing, a game I had written, but it's about they had picked up a game that they really liked the idea about. So I really enjoyed that.
Do you expect that with A Town Called Malice, the audience is going to be similar to Bedlam Hall, or do you think that you'll have like many new people that are with different interests?
I think we'll have new people. I am always impressed at some of the audiences that you develop in terms of their region. So explain what I mean by that. So obviously Spirit of 77, had obviously a very strong US following, but it also had a very strong Germany following, because they really enjoyed the retro aspects of, the 1970s culture. And obviously, Bedlam Hall had people interested in the UK, but also in Canada, in Australia, and wow, I'm trying to think of one place that really freaked us out. I can't remember, but at different groups. And so I'm fairly certain it will have a different audience, but I know that the genre itself of Nordic Noir and that type of Scandinavian horror type of environment, there's already a lot of examples that have been coming over into the culture. When I say, Twin Peaks is that, people go, okay, I'm really into that, and I know what you're doing. So we already have people who are jumping in and wanting to get involved as soon as possible. And I know that when it's available, we will be developing a new core group of people who will really like it, and then hopefully they'll like our other games too.
Yep. So I think we are kind of running out of time. So to finish up, could you tell us a story from one of your playtests that you especially like or especially memorable, and I'll send the links in the meantime.
Well, actually, okay, yeah. So let's see. I think that one of the things, the last the playtest of doing the space station game, I played the medic character, personally speaking, and so I wanted to make the medic not unlike Star Trek Voyager, in that it was a AI as opposed to a real person. And so part of the way the conceit for it was that because it was on a space station, the character of the medic AI would be located in one area of the station at any given time. So what would happen is that that players were, whenever my character would enter, it would be, Med 5 entering the docking bay. And then people would be talking with it. And then when they would get frustrated because the character was always very pleasant, even when it was infuriating to people. Like, I'm sorry, I can't do that at this time. Can I help you? And they would just get frustrated with me being always very cheerful and what have you. And I loved doing that. I really enjoy doing playtests. I always say that playtests teach you a lot about your game, and that they will make you a better designer if you just kind of let them run wild, see what they do with it. And that's also another thing I learned, which is you need to have different types of groups of people who will run your game or play your game that totally different way. And I know we're short on time, so I'm trying to keep it short. One group actually, we were playing. Okay, this is a terrible story. So I was playing at a game convention, and for whatever reason, I had scheduled a game really early on a Sunday morning, and I'm not gonna lie, Angel, I was a little hungover, and so the game itself, because I was running it, became some of the most terrifying gaming experience for the players, because they were like expecting to be really over the top, and I'm just sitting there going, no, the creature basically slowly slithers through the grating of the airplane, and then they're going and then it ended with the strangest game where it was basically, or event where the final conflict was a supernatural game of basketball for the fate of the universe. And so that's just how the games work. So
yeah, that sounds really cool.
Yeah, and so they were all like doing that and whatever, and like same game, terrifying and ridiculous. And that's probably the best way to describe Monkeyfun Studios as a whole.
Yeah, I love those kind of stories where you, like, when you are sick, or like one time in a convention, I lost my voice for 2 days, and then I had to run a game and I could barely speak, so I had a great horrific voice. Yes, and everyone was so into it. I was like, I'm dying here.
Yeah, I am infamous for the fact that when I run games, I stand. That's really what I do, because I like having that kind of presentation. So people will, I always encourage people when I'm running a game to get up and, act out certain scenes. And it's always very funny when people come into the room and just see everybody standing around like they're climbing a wall, and like, what are you guys doing? And like, well, they're climbing a wall because there's a robot, in the form of a giant gorilla that's attacking everybody. Oh, okay.
Of course.
And then they leave. Yeah. So
anyway, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I've let the links in the chat, and I let the links in the description of the video on YouTube as well. I recommend all of you to go check her out, check their previous works, and be on the lookout for a town called Malice. It looks really interesting, and I cannot wait to play it as well.
Maybe I need to make a trip to the UK then. How about that?
In the UK you will be like so love, like reading the Bedlam Hall. After living in UK is the best because I get all the reference and I do not get offended because I'm not from here, so it's the best.
And I had to make it very clear because I tried to make it clear when I was referencing English cuisine. It's like,
I've read that.
I love a good beef Wellington or anything like that. I really do, or fish and chips. But I had to point out, no, they just have bad taste. The family has bad taste. That's important to point out. Okay, so because I didn't want to play into that cliche because it's not true at all. So,
but the weather stuff is true.
Well, it can be a little challenging. Can be.
Anyway.
So thank you very much for having me. And again, as I said, you can always find what we're doing at monkeyfunstudios.com, and we're on Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and Instagram. So there you go.
Nice. So thanks everyone. I hope to see you all soon. I'll be doing another interview next week with Jay Isles. She's the author of Legacy Life Among the Ruins, second edition, and few other games. So she'll be here as well, and I hope to see you all there. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll see you next time. And I always say, light, love, and prosper. May the force be with you, and see you soon. Bye.